Hey, follow up from the Instagram post from a couple days ago or whenever you are actually watching this, where it was really about trying to look badass with a Harry Potter junk band on. I like when they take up a lot of space. I like wearing them. I used to always wear a headband way back in the day. If you see a lot of my competitive powerlifting videos, even in training, gym lifts, I always had a headband. I wore the big wristbands. Those things were really popular in the NBA at that time. Like Melo would wear his headband over his ears. I would do that every once in a while. I always felt like it was part of the uniform. And I didn't really get too much heat from it. But like if I was squatting, it would say the answer. If you look closely at some of my big lifts that might be on YouTube still, I would do that. But I like wearing headbands. Anyway, that picture did have a clinical message in there, and it was brief, and it was actually somewhat of a key part of my talk that I did back in Perform Better in December, what I did again in February this month at in Orlando at the Raising the Bar conference. I'll keep streamlining it for Perform Better in the summer, where really what we're trying to discuss was, while all the different potential interventions have a role, they all relatively look very, very different, and they're addressing different adaptations, and trying to get them all at the same time isn't always practical, feasible, even physiologically reasonable. We've talked a little bit about the interference effect, some of the realities, some of the things that might really be book science. That being said, when we talked about the rehab piece, or this infiltration of rehab techniques into the recovery space, which in effect can change movement, what I like to say now, in a dramatic fashion. So we got a dramatic result from doing X. And what that means in my nomenclature is that you did something, and in a matter of seconds, there was this very, very desirable change. I think foam rolling sometimes fit into that, where in no way, shape, or form should we ever have any reason to believe that foam rolling actually changes the tissue. However, I think a lot of people get up and do things that are more desirable. Something very positive happened. I don't think anything happened at the myofascial level. There was probably some kind of very positive, tactile, temporary change. We can't call it an adaptation, or at least I don't think we should. I might call it an adjustment, but then of course we're gonna start to confuse that with other types of adjustments that are also dramatic responses. If I just do this, and oh my God, my neck feels great, it moves so much more. You could not have possibly affected the quality of the tissue, the position of the bones, any kind of tensile or elastic fashion from this technique. Instead, we know that it takes significantly longer periods of time to create those adaptations. So what's really happening? It's a neurological experience. I don't even know if there's a name. So we tend to call it magic, because if you don't know what it is, magic is just what someone doesn't understand. And I, as you know from T equals R1, I think, we talked about when I was in the finale of David Copperfield in Las Vegas. Trust me, magic is just what you don't know or don't understand. Now, more specifically, the first time I started to use the term magic for these type of dramatic results, I think we're going to go back to 2008 or 2009, when the first time I was a student for a DNS course. Now, I had seen the material a few years earlier. Someone had the manual or some photocopies of the manual, and looking at it with a buddy at that time, I'm like, oh my God, this is like the functional movement screen on steroids, where there clearly was a very strong perspective dating to the neuromuscular piece, where using analogies of movement, that if baby was doing them, there was something very positive into all aspects in terms of joint positioning / joint centration, but also from motor learning, whereas no one tells baby what to do. There were lots of parallels that seemed to be very exciting at that time. I'm not sure I am as staunch a believer in the rationale, but I'm certainly a strong believer in the results. And back in 2008, part of the reason I would also say that, yeah, and many of you heard me say that, and I will also say that I have every DNS course I have ever taken. I have been a full paying customer, so I can kind of say whatever I want. It is single-handedly the most comprehensive explanation of human movement and motor learning that can happen in a movement perspective. And it is the single most dramatic passive technique that I have learned in terms of reflex locomotion. But when you hear me say, yeah, it's just not the same anymore, they don't teach it the same anymore, because as far as I know, they don't teach reflex locomotion anymore. And let somebody else tell you the reason why. I'm not trying to get into it, because I could study DNS every week. It's absolutely brilliant. I would prefer to pick and choose my instructors a little bit better than what I have in the past. In 2008 or 2009, in Arizona, we learned reflex locomotion, and firsthand learned what this is a technique where you are using key areas of the body and using DNS according to Collage is using your hand or thumb and applying a force in a very particular vector, but not another vector. And these vectors are in line with the first and second abdominal changes. If this stuff is interesting, you can take a DNS course, buyer beware. I talked a lot about these things in T=R2. I continue to talk about them right now. And when you can apply the pressure to the proper patient in the proper vector, in the proper way, you can elicit what is called an anticipatory response, where the person is actually moving, and physiologically, this is stimulating the same way as voluntary actions would occur, except they're not voluntary. And it would be kind of foolish to believe, unless you actually saw it yourself and applied, and it's someone else that's doing it and doesn't know what's supposed to happen. So this is very, very powerful, incredibly powerful. I was playing Jeff Banachek's arm up and down like a fiddle by applying this reflex locomotion strategy to the ASIS. But the big one was, and everybody there saw it, Neil Ramp, who many of you know, brilliant certified athletic trainer, went from laying down to basically doing this rudimentary version of a get-up, simply from two therapists that were expert, they were instructors, applying these strategies. And the best word to describe what anybody saw, it was magic. Like, you're in this first class, you never saw any of this stuff before, and you're just kind of playing this individual like a puppet, and they're actually moving in a predictable way. Now, what is also very, very important that we learn about reflex locomotion, if those anticipatory patterns are for some reason not what they are supposed to be, well, then that's a major problem. At which point, there's value in at least attempting to elicit these voluntarily involuntary movements. Now, the reality, just like a cavitation in a high velocity technique is not required for success, just like the jump sign is not required for the success of a dry needling technique, the anticipatory patterns are not required for success in reflex locomotion. However, the normalization of intra-abdominal pressure and the normalization of the rib cage and the pelvis probably be reserved for a more challenging patient. I would say one that must have the requisite mobility, even if you can't find it right away. You could apply this very, very powerful neurological strategy and actually create an incredible dramatic result. And also furthering that thought process, if you push on somebody's ankle and then all of a sudden their shoulder starts to move, and then someone else's objective measure of strength or range of motion with your classic goniometer changed, you kind of have to start to believe that anything can do anything, and what is possible from a neurological perspective or a physiological perspective. So we talked about this in the rehab space on how a rehab professional can be very, very special, because we like to thumb our nose, and to a degree there's some justification, at therapists that only do manual therapy and somehow say, all right, I'll see you next time. Oh man, I think that's a suspect approach. Oh, but my arm went from here to here just by cracking my neck, and then look, I believe it. So there's some people that like to call those tricks, and I don't know if they're playing on the term that I probably said first in terms of magic. These shouldn't be discounted. Like, that actually happened. It's not a trick. It's not something from Asgard where we don't even understand how it happened. It does actually apply to the laws of physiology and neurology. So the limiting factor there is not that you're good, even though you have this significant change, this dramatically positive change. We then absolutely have no choice but to follow up with active exercise to create the tissues that support that change, because you have much more of a reason to believe that they just come back. So, for instance, you could even take this level to a pharmaceutical component. If you get a cortisone shot in your shoulder, but you don't change anything that led to whatever was creating the inflammation in your shoulder in the first place, did the cortisone shot work? Was it magic? Or was it just not in a complete process? I don't think that it's always absolutely has to be the same therapist. I often see people, and part of it is because I'm trying to play nice, even though the person that they saw was usually probably not using the same model that I would use. Hey, maybe you have a really good plan A. I believe you that you do this, this, and this, and your shoulder moves better, but then it comes back. Maybe it's not because plan A is bad, we're just not following it up with plan B. And part of the value of the talk is how you can stand out a little bit. Well, if you're the one that always comes up with a great plan B, you can work together with the therapist that's really good at plan A. And whether they actually realize they're being incomplete or not, doesn't really matter, as long as the patient or the client is being served in a fashion that makes them very, very satisfied. What we cannot have, or at least should not have, is some kind of communication form that leads the patient to feel satisfied when their rehabilitation or their recovery process is incomplete. And I think that's really what we're seeing too much of. And if you can be, as a rehab professional, physical therapist, chiro, whatever it might be, you can stand out a little bit. And that's really exactly what the title of the talk was, how to stand out. So these dramatic results, whether it be manual therapy, you can't do 2 passes where you put that little extra business in there. One needle cannot create this change that affects every system. I mentioned needling, I mentioned reflex locomotion, the 2 single most powerful tools that I am familiar with. There are others that have incredible carryover to many different levels of controlling pain, motor control. I don't think it can be mobility, because mobility didn't change like that. It can't go back that way, especially if there's injury where there has not been a significant amount of active movement. We've got to introduce that active movement to create ideal alignment through the connective tissue, the direction of collagenous tubules, to create a level of tissue that simply isn't going to break again or be responsive to motor strategies in a consistent way. That is a significant component linking manual therapy to motor control. But is that magic? You did do something better from this little therapy. Something really did happen. I think it's neurological. I think it was a pleasant tactile experience, if that's going to fly. But it's not this unexplained thing, even though what we saw from reflex locomotion is... it was unbelievable, because for many of us, it was the first time we were getting exposed to this incredibly powerful message and incredibly powerful both manual therapy and active exercise. Unfortunately, from what I understand, reflex locomotion isn't a part of the healthcare professional courses of A, B, C, and D. Hey, there's a fellow named Richard Cohen, who is Voita trained, which is different than reflex locomotion according to Kolar. Reflex locomotion according to Voita is actually an older method, probably where things were based off of, but the positions are different, the directions of where you create the vectors are different. And I've actually also studied in Poland, where some of the more original purveyors of reflex locomotion in children were taught. It was one, I think it was the actual original Montessori school, where a group of us, under the direction or mentorship of a chiro in Indiana named Ryan Van Mater. So those are names maybe you could go to Germany and learn Voita, because I don't think you're going to get reflex locomotion anymore from the commercial messages that are available through other models. But whether it comes off backhanded or not, number one, I would pay to study DNS more than what I do, and it is single-handedly the best overall explanation of human movement and the most powerful techniques and approaches. It basically explains everything, even if you don't actually do their exercises or reflex locomotion. I owe a significant debt to my thought process to what I've learned as a full paying customer of DNS. But that's where magic came from. That's like, magic is like, because you could do something, a person just laying there and they just start breathing really easily, they get up and all of a sudden they can do something. We've seen that with other breathing techniques. They're real. It is important to do something next, which usually involves lifting really, really heavy things and a lot of time under tension to create the long-standing physiological change after the neurological manual therapy. There's nothing wrong with manual therapy. A lot of messages that you don't need manual therapy, or don't do this, or don't. If you can get to the finish line faster and remove a barrier faster, that's what these neurological techniques are doing. They're removing something that I don't know has a name. If you do, then put it in the comments. I just said that. I'm getting better, right? Hey, you should not ever be shamed for helping people. And if somebody walks out of your office after a flying 7, you cracked here, and here, you're just not done. It's not that is such a horrible thing. What's probably horrible is the message that you're good and you have to come back for 4 years so that you don't die or some bullshit like that. That's horrible. That's terrible. But it doesn't mean that these therapies have no place. They do have a place. They're not magic. They just they remove something, and we're using a tactile experience. So that's, I hope that was useful. You now know where magic is from. You get a little bit of my perspective on DNS, which is hands down a significant debt. And hopefully that headband or that junk band that you saw still gains me 30 points. Gryffindor. Hey, keep an eye out for that leprechaun.